Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royse. I am a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Shannon Douglass is the first woman to be elected president of California Farm Bureau. Shannon has a background in agriculture, has been involved in the farming business since college. Let's welcome Shannon to tell us about her passion for farming and to share her insights into California agriculture. Welcome, Shannon.
Hello, I'm glad to be here with you.
Please tell us who you are and how you became involved with the California Farm Bureau.
Absolutely. So I'm Shannon Douglass. My husband and son and I farm here in Northern California. We're up in Glenn County, so about 100 miles north of Sacramento. I am a first generation farmer. My husband came from a farm background, but by the time he graduated high school, there was no longer a farm that he'd be able to return to. So we got real creative through college and after, and how we kind of started building our own farm. So we are diversified farmers today. We have a variety of crops, from nut crops like walnuts to beef cattle. So we're raising cattle that becomes supermarket beef eventually, and a little bit of direct marketing. We also grow sunflowers that we're growing for parent seed, and a variety of forage crops, which are things like hay that are fed to dairy cattle, horses, etc. So we do kind of a combination of farming. And I got into Farm Bureau when I was in college. So while going to school, there were a variety of clubs you could get involved in, but I found that this Farm Bureau organization had some additional opportunities. And I really realized that in wanting to get involved and wanting to really help promote agriculture, that Farm Bureau was such an important way to do that. So during college, I ended up getting involved in a local political campaign that was not about a candidate, but it was about an issue, and it was about an issue facing agriculture. And I got very involved as far as in speakers and media, and even helping knock on doors, talking to people about the issue, and found that you could really make a difference when you got involved with an organization that was doing such good work already. So that kind of led my continued involvement in Farm Bureau, but it really started in college. When I graduated, my husband and I settled here in Glenn County, where he was from. From there, started a young farmers organization in our county, and eventually we just kind of kept getting more involved. So I became a member of our statewide organization. And just after our son was born, so a little over 10 years ago, I was elected the chairman of our Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee. And frankly, I just kept seeing that there was great opportunity to talk about agriculture and help advocate for our industry in this state. And I really found Farm Bureau being the way to do that.
Could you please tell us what does Farm Bureau do?
Absolutely. So Farm Bureau is created on a local level. We have farm bureaus across the United States. Most of the counties across the United States have a farm bureau. They started a county office. So I live in Glenn County, and we have a local office here. We have 2 staff members that work for us on a local level. All of our counties are involved in the state organization. The state organization is part of our national organization with a headquarter back in Washington, D.C. But Farm Bureau really works to advocate for farmers and ranchers on a wide variety of issues. We were created just over 100 years ago. Some of our farm bureaus are coming up on 110 years, actually, anniversaries. And when we were first created, they realized that there were areas where there was some farm advising, frankly, needed, especially when you think about 100 years ago and trying to share information. So when a Farm Bureau got together, it showed a need to have a farm advisor in an area. And today, while we are still closely involved with our farm advisors in the Cooperative Extension Program, most of our members are really involved to make sure they have a voice locally in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., because we know our farmers are busy farming, frankly, and being business owners and working on the farm and driving tractor and managing their books, etc. And it's pretty hard for them to also be advocates for their industry and make runs to Sacramento or to Washington, D.C. to talk about these issues that impact us on the farm. So for a whole host of reasons, but Farm Bureau really, at its core, we work to advocate for keeping our family farms in business here in California.
What is the differences between county, state, and national farm bureaus? And is every state in California has a farm bureau?
So 54 counties now in California have a farm bureau. And I would say, and I should say that we have 54 county farm bureaus because Yuba Sutter is one farm bureau, even though they're two counties. So some of that happens, but we have a farm bureau in most every county, including San Francisco now. That was our new addition this last year, which was pretty exciting for us. It was the first time we've added a county to our list in about 60 years. So we really had to dig deep in the archives to figure out how to do that. But nearly every county has a farm bureau. The way they're organized varies depending on the part of the state that they're in and the size, really. So we have some counties that have multiple staff members. They have maybe 5 staff members, and some that maybe only have a part-time person, or in some cases don't have any staff at all. They're purely volunteers. Those are, of course, some of our smaller counties. Generally, the counties are focused on those county issues. So they're helping advocate to us at the statewide level what other issues they might need looked at on a state and federal level. But their staff tends to be pretty focused on their local issues, whether that's water or land use, some planning and zoning, all sorts of things that are impacting their farmers on a very local level. And then issues that are broader, they tend to push to us at the state level, of course, so we can help advocate for agriculture as a whole with a united voice. So most of the counties have them. And then, of course, as I was explaining what our statewide organization does, we also do a variety of advocacy work. So we have a foundation doing agriculture education. We have a television show, actually, that you might see in some of your Bay Area stations, but across California, we get about 2.5 million viewers every year watching our television programming. Those are half-hour episodes called California Bountiful, all about food and farming and what you can find kind of in your backyard and in your home areas. We have a magazine as well. So we do a wide variety of work. And then at the national level, they are, of course, focused on our national issues, generally in the Washington, D.C. Advocacy type work.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of farm does San Francisco County has it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I had such a wonderful visit when I got to come to their inaugural event just, I guess, a couple months ago now. I think that was back in either end of February or March. But so San Francisco is really unique to us. When we think about farming, we tend to think about, larger farms and rural communities, but San Francisco has agriculture as well. There's a variety of urban farms that are in a more consolidated area, of course. There's not a lot of big acreage farms for certain in San Francisco County, but also a lot of people in San Francisco that are involved in agriculture in other areas too, and this provides them a new opportunity to get involved. But at our event, San Francisco's event, but that I was so enjoyed participating in, we found a lot of vegetable farmers and also those who are producing mushrooms. So it's actually kind of an interesting thing too, in more of a warehouse type setting where they're producing those. So a good, exciting, different opportunity to see what the San Francisco farmers are up to.
Is it fishing and game is part of a farm bureau?
Say that again, fish and game?
Yes.
So fish, absolutely. So we do have aquaculture farmers in California, in different parts of the state, actually still, caviar being produced and a variety of farmed fish. So we do have that as part of it. I can't think of anyone I know that is a member anyway that's producing more the game side of things, but there are some opportunities I'm sure there that I just simply don't know. We have about 30,000 members total, and so that includes we always say that's over 400 different crops and commodities that are being grown that our members are raising. So there's probably a few in there that I'm not even familiar with.
Facing unpredictable weather patterns, what is the biggest challenge in farming in California?
So weather is one of our most common challenges that we have, but it varies year to year. It tends to be a little unpredictable. So in agriculture, our crops can be susceptible to everything from the extreme heat stresses to extreme cold stresses. So in nut production, for example, in the early spring, we have great concern over frost because if we get frost at the wrong time on the nuts, primarily for the almonds, but also for the stone fruit crops. So things like peaches can be real damaged, cherries, etc. If we get freeze at the wrong time when the trees are flowering, that can provide damage and they never produce the fruit, basically, which is whether that's fruits or nuts. So frost damage is something of great concern too. And the unpredictability of weather is becoming increasingly challenging. But I would say, really, in California, our greatest challenge is the regulatory environment here in the state. So people talk about it can be harder to do business in California overall. And certainly that applies to farming as well. And sometimes we hear, I had someone maybe probably a year or so ago, and they said, well, there's this stigma or this belief that it is harder to do business and we have higher regulatory costs here. And I was able to share with them a study that was done out of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in roughly 2017 or 2018. And that study looked at regulatory costs over a 10-year time frame. So they had done a study in about 2007 and then did a follow-up study 10 years later. And they took a look at what were the on-the-farm costs for a mid-sized farm on the central coast of California. I believe it's a lettuce farm that's used in the study. But they said, here's kind of just let's look at a little snapshot. And they took a look at what those regulatory costs were. So everything from the permits and the fees and the particularly a lot of labor issues are hugely impactful in the regulatory environment. And they said, so they took it the first time, here's what the costs were. They looked at it again 10 years later. And in that 10-year time span, they found that the regulatory costs for a very moderate sized California farmer had increased by 795%. And that's a tremendous increase. And again, that includes labor, that includes a variety of permitting, it includes some water issues. And that's a pretty heavy burden for our California farmers. Farmers tend to run on very thin margins. There's not a tremendous amount of profit in farming. People tend to farm because they love it, not because they become extremely wealthy. And so we have pretty light margins, and they vary tremendously year to year, again, depending on those factors like weather and crop values. And right now we're in a time in particular where we're facing pretty low commodity prices. And so those regulatory pressures in California are really burdensome to our California farmers. And it tends to be the number one issue we face. It's kind of a blanket issue. It impacts whatever type of farming you have, basically. I can't think of really any exceptions that don't battle it up and down the state. It's across geography. And really our number one is these regulatory costs.
Okay. If it costs so much, I have two questions for you. Why can't farmer raising the price? Is it too much competition? And secondly, I'd like to know about water, because recently we have a drought years. And how do you addressing that issue?
Yeah. So let's talk about the price thing first, and then you might have to remind me to make sure we talk about water second. So most farmers in California, with not a lot of exceptions, we are what they call price takers. So the market really dictates, because they are commodities, what our products are worth. And so it makes it extremely difficult to pass the prices on to consumers. So in California, we produce, like maybe we can talk about dairy, for example, because there's a lot of dairies in other states. People know we have a lot of milk in California too. So our dairy farmers have much higher costs here in California than a farmer in another state would, primarily because of our labor issues, but also our environmental concerns. But their milk, and maybe milk wasn't the best example because our milk pricing gets really interesting, but really, when you look at the commodity of milk, we're just looking at milk, right? And so whether you get milk from California or from Nevada or from the Midwest and meets the standards, it's generally milk, even though it costs more to produce it in California. So it makes it very hard for us to pass our additional costs on to consumers, if not impossible, because we really are price takers. There are a few exceptions, of course. People that are doing some direct marketing might be able to pass that cost along, but our consumers still then tend to be able to change and switch to something just produced elsewhere because it can be produced at a lower cost. So because we're producing commodities, it tends to make it pretty hard to just change the price. Unfortunately, the market as a whole is dictating our pricing on that piece. On the drought, we did just come out of a pretty serious drought, and it's kind of a cycle. You know, we have droughts. Unfortunately, every few years, it would be nice for it to be a little more consistent, but that is part of, I guess, what makes farming interesting is the changes year to year. And the drought is very impactful for California farmers. And looking at water in California and the way we use it, it ends up being very complicated. I think sometimes people think in water in terms of, Northern California water and Southern California water. But, you're sitting in the Bay Area and obviously you guys have water and your water, a lot of it actually comes from the eastern part of California. But our water issues, number one, are quite regional. We tend to get more of the rainfall comes in the northern part of the state. That's where our largest water reservoirs are. But then we have to move that water to other parts of the state, and the movement of the water ends up providing a variety of regulatory challenges. So depending on where you are in California and how you farm, where you get your water could be very different. For example, in Imperial County, they get a lot of Colorado River water, which is, different and how that's handled versus someone in Fresno County, for example, and someone different for someone in Glenn County. We personally farm primarily with what we call surface water, which means it's water that's been stored in a reservoir that's then moved to us. Other parts of the state, they have to rely on groundwater. So they're having to pump water from the ground and utilize that on their crops. And kind of a new challenge for us the last decade or so in California has been the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And that really wants people to use less groundwater, I think would be a summation of it, and really watch closely how much groundwater is being used. But we have to use water to grow crops. So unfortunately, it's not an input that we can completely take out. Pretty much every single crop we're going to grow requires a great amount of water. And we've done a lot in California over and across the country, but over the last really probably the last 20 to 50 years, improving our water efficiencies and how very mindful we can be with all of the water that we use. But farming requires water, and the big challenge in California is getting enough water to the crops where we need it and when we need it. There's environmental factors for that. You could do a whole episode. You probably do a multi-series episode on all of our water challenges in California, actually, whether it's moving it down rivers or in aqueducts and the challenges that provides. But the drought in California has been very impactful for a number of years, and I think we have a lot of people still recovering. It definitely impacts the crops we grow, what we choose to grow, and even the long-term plans we make as farmers.
You mentioned aqueduct. How far does that goes? All the way down to Southern California? And is that strictly only used for farming?
It is not only used for farming. So our water system, we could pull up some really amazing maps actually on how the water gets moved, but we have our California aqueduct is the one that's going along kind of I-5 really through. You can see it through most of the Central Valley. Not all of that is agricultural water. I don't know what percentage. I'd have to pull it up specific to that project. But water is moved through that. And then there are a lot of smaller projects as well. So while the aqueduct is a big one, there's also smaller systems like that in different parts of the state also moving water. So it gets very, very interesting the way we move water around to get water to the places where we're growing food and the places where people need it.
Okay, let's go back to the Farm Bureau. Why should people join the Farm Bureau?
Yeah, well, people who are involved in agriculture, we really want to be a part of our Farm Bureau team. It's an important place to keep updated on the agricultural issues that we're facing, the things that are happening in Sacramento and back in Washington, D.C., the legal issues that farmers are facing, labor issues, etc. But we also think there's a great opportunity for people who are not necessarily farmers to be involved in agriculture. And so people who care about food and care about where the food is produced in California and want to support farming here in our state, whether that's larger farmers or smaller farmers or more urban farmers. There's opportunity to get involved and support our work. We have what we call our associate members, who are people who are not farmers who join, and we have about 8 to 10,000 of them, depending on the year, who are members of our organization and provide an important voice as well. They can take advantage of some great programming we have. I was mentioning the television show earlier. They also get a great magazine that's very focused on food and farming and basically enjoying great food and cooking great food here in California. So really people who have passion for the work that we do and keeping farmers farming are great candidates to be members of our organization.
What is the biggest reward from working in farming?
For me, when it comes to the farming we do, and this is interesting because I have to do less of it anymore, but we started doing what we call direct marketing a number of years ago. And so when we're direct marketing, that means that we are not selling our stuff through a grocery store. We're selling it perhaps at a farmer's market. That's typically how we did it, or direct to the consumer. And farming is kind of a slow thing in a lot of ways. So, for example, out my window here are walnut trees, and it was about 5 years before we had a harvest from those walnut trees. So before you could really enjoy the fruits of your labor, right, it was a 5-year process. And when we're producing beef, it's a multi-year process. We're, selecting strong genetics for our cow herd to produce, better calves, basically. And then over time, those calves are grown here, and then they're finished, and then they are processed. They used to actually get processed right in our county. And by the time they get on someone's dinner table, we've spent 2 to 5 years, arguably, on getting a great product there. Depending on, how you look at the time investments of it. And when somebody really gets to enjoy the food that you've spent so much time growing and making sure was high quality, that's incredibly rewarding. But I think even more so, I really appreciate the interface that we have in agriculture. So agriculture involves so much open space naturally because it just takes room to grow. And with that comes, actually last night, not only did I see, wild deer, of course, I say wild deer, but they're only wild, I suppose, in our area. So deer and wild turkeys that all get to enjoy our agricultural landscape too. And we, by being able to kind of help with that part of it too, it's this interesting intersection with nature that I think is a really beautiful thing too.
Well, we in Silicon Valley and everything is about technology. Have you seen more technology used in farming?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, with my husband, I farm with our son, and I have really been encouraging my son to take as many technology related classes, things like coding, as he can, because the way that's going to tie into agriculture is very important. And I don't think we're ever going to be farming in warehouses and things like that. There will be some people who are doing that, to be clear, but that won't be all of agriculture. But utilizing technology is really making fascinating changes. And this is everything from using robotics actually with milk cows. So, for example, we have people who are using robotic milkers. And what that means is basically the cow decides when it wants to get milked multiple times a day and goes to visit the milking robot. It includes, like at our house right now, because of the wind, I can't see it from where I'm sitting, but we use a variety of sensors to decide on irrigation here to make sure we're using water in the most efficient way we can. There's also the ability, and Farm Bureau's worked hard in the last couple of years to allow our members to better utilize drone technology in a legal way. There had to be some changes in some of the aircraft rules to help us in agriculture, but utilizing drones to check on crops, and we're not there yet, but soon to be able to provide our crop protection materials in very specific ways. And if there's a pest infestation, you could really target where you need to take care of bugs, for example, utilizing things like drones. So Technology is a huge part of the work that we do and just continues to grow and evolve. Every year we have new tools at our that we have available to us, and I think that's a big part of us growing in the future.
So how can young generations or women get involved in farming?
Yeah. Well, I would say Farm Bureau is a great way to do it, and I think I'm proof of that. I think that uh, for a long time, people have always thought about farmers in a very stereotypical way. And it's probably not unlike thinking about a firefighter and that firefighters are men, because when you grew up, that's who was in the books, and that's who was the firefighters. In agriculture, sometimes I've had people actually tell me I'm too clean to be a farmer. They expect me to be in overalls and I think chewing on straw or something. And we know that just because that's what our images of that are doesn't mean that's reality. And so there are a whole lot of women in agriculture. In fact, well over 30% of farms in the United States are woman owned and operated. So we know it's a huge part of our industry, and that the face of the farmer in California and elsewhere is becoming increasingly diverse. And our Farm Bureau faces are really, I think, showing that as that change continues to happen. So I encourage women particularly, but anyone who wants to get involved to step forward and be willing to start serving on a committee, whether that's for someone who's listening right now and is in the San Francisco area, reaching out and finding out what kind of activities that San Francisco Farm Bureau has going on. There's a great interest in San Francisco about high quality food and knowing where that food is produced and getting to know the farmers connected to it. And Farm Bureau can be a great way to do that, but it's also a great way for someone to really advocate for their industry as well, if they are a farmer themselves or closely tied to the agriculture industry. And so I tell people just, go online, make that call, become a member, find out when those meetings are, and look for those opportunities to get involved. We have a ton of great conferences that we put on. So if there's someone listening who's maybe new to farming, we actually have a great mentorship program that we've been doing through a grant program where we're connecting new farmers. They do need, for this particular program, they do need a year of experience. They're kind of getting their bearings, but where we connect them with a very established farmer to have that opportunity to share ideas and concerns and what are these challenges and how did you get through this, because there's so much value in that mentorship. But we put on conferences for our young farmers program. So people who are 35 and under, we have a particular, actually a couple of meetings a year, but this conference segment that's really targeted to the challenges they face as beginning farmers and people who are so early career. But if you've got an interest in agriculture and in farming, we've got an opportunity for you at Farm Bureau, and we'd love to engage.
Shannon, I know a few people, they in technology, they actually have a technology using drones. We're also using the satellite dish to helping farmer. Would you recommend those people also join the Farm Bureau?
Oh, absolutely. If you're involved somehow in agriculture, we'd love to have you involved, because whether you want to be in the space with us and you want to be at our events and our conferences and talking directly to farmers, or engaging in our educational programming. So we do, for example, some continuing education for our members really throughout the year that are all done on Zoom. And then we do, so, of course, in-person events and things. But there are so many ways for someone to connect with farmers or get involved in farmers by joining and engaging with Farm Bureau.
Wonderful. And what is the best way for people to get in touch with their state or local Farm Bureau?
Absolutely. So here in California, the best way to do that is visiting our California Farm Bureau website, so cfbf.com. And from there, you can find your county information if that's specific to you, because I know some people, maybe they spend some of their time in one area, but perhaps they consider home a different area, so they can choose the area that they want to get involved with. And if you're from a different state, you can go to fb.org. That's our Farm Bureau, American Farm Bureau website, and find the state that they want to find that information about. But we'd love to have you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. This was great. It's very
Absolutely.
informative.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.